The wind howled through the empty streets like a wild animal searching for shelter. Sarah pulled her coat tighter around her body as she walked home from her late shift at the hospital. The storm had arrived earlier than the weather forecast predicted, and now thick snowflakes fell from the dark sky, covering everything in a blanket of white. Her feet crunched against the fresh snow as she hurried along the deserted sidewalk. Eager to reach the warmth of her small apartment, Sarah had always taken this route home. It was the quickest way, cutting through an old industrial area that most people avoided after dark. The streetlights flickered weakly, casting strange shadows on the abandoned warehouses that lined both sides of the road. She had never felt afraid walking here before, but tonight something felt different. The storm made everything look unfamiliar and dangerous. As she turned the corner near the old textile factory, sound cut through the noise of the wind. It was faint at first, almost impossible to hear over the howling storm. Sarah stopped walking and listened carefully. There it was again. A soft whimpering sound, like something small and frightened crying out for help. Her heart began to beat faster. She knew she should keep walking, get home quickly before the storm got worse. But something inside her refused to move forward without investigating. She followed the sound, her shoes sinking into the deepening snow. The whimpering grew louder as she approached a narrow alley between two buildings. The space was dark and filled with scattered trash and old wooden crates. Sarah pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. The weak beam of light swept across the alley, revealing nothing but garbage and shadows at first. Then she saw them. Two tiny shapes huddled together behind a broken cardboard box, shivering violently in the freezing cold. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she moved closer. They were puppies, no more than a few weeks old, with matted fur covered in snow and ice. Their small bodies trembled uncontrollably, and their eyes looked up at her with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Sarah's mind raced. She couldn't just leave them here. They would freeze to death within hours in this weather. But she lived in a tiny apartment that didn't allow pets. Her landlord had made that rule very clear when she signed the lease 6 months ago. She was already struggling to pay rent on her nurse's salary, and taking care of 2 puppies would cost money she didn't have. The puppies whimpered again, and one of them tried to stand up, but collapsed back into the snow. Sarah made her decision. She quickly took off her scarf and wrapped it around both puppies, gathering them gently into her arms. They were so cold that she could barely feel any warmth coming from their bodies. She tucked them inside her coat, holding them against her chest where they could feel her heartbeat. The walk home seemed to take forever. The storm had grown stronger, and the wind pushed against her with every step. Sarah protected the puppies with her body, bending forward to shield them from the worst of the weather. Her hands were numb from the cold, and her face stung from the icy wind. But she kept moving forward. When she finally reached her apartment building, Sarah glanced around nervously. The lobby was empty, which was a relief. She quickly climbed the stairs to her third-floor apartment, trying to keep her footsteps quiet. The last thing she needed was for her nosy neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, to see her carrying animals into the building. Inside her apartment, Sarah immediately went to the bathroom and started running warm water in the sink. Not too hot, she remembered from a documentary she had watched about animal rescue. She gently placed the puppies in the shallow water, supporting their heads carefully. They were too weak to protest, their eyes barely open, as the water warmed their tiny bodies. Sarah could finally see them clearly. They were mixed-breed puppies, one mostly black with white paws, and the other brown with a white patch on its chest. Their ribs showed through their thin fur, and they were covered in dirt and fleas. Someone had abandoned them, leaving them to die in the storm. The thought made Sarah's hands shake with anger. She dried them carefully with towels, rubbing gently to help their circulation. Then she wrapped them in a soft blanket and held them close. The puppies had stopped shivering, and they pressed against each other, seeking comfort. Sarah realized she had no idea what to feed them. She searched online and learned that young puppies needed special formula, not regular milk. Looking at the clock, Sarah saw it was almost midnight. No pet stores would be open now. She found a recipe for emergency puppy formula using ingredients she had in her kitchen: egg yolk, plain yogurt, and a tiny bit of honey mixed with warm water. She prepared it carefully, then used a dropper to feed the puppies small amounts. At first, they were too weak to eat. Sarah persisted, gently rubbing their throats to encourage swallowing. Slowly, they began to respond. The black puppy took the formula first, its tiny tongue lapping weakly at the dropper. The brown puppy followed, drinking with more enthusiasm. Sarah felt hope rising in her chest as she watched them eat. She stayed awake all night, feeding the puppies every 2 hours and keeping them warm. Between feedings, she researched puppy care on her laptop, learning about vaccinations, proper nutrition, and development stages. The more she read, the more overwhelmed she felt. Taking care of 2 sick puppies would require time, money, and dedication she wasn't sure she could provide. As dawn broke and pale light filtered through her curtains, Sarah looked down at the sleeping puppies curled up in their blanket. They looked slightly better already, their breathing more regular and their bodies warmer. The black puppy opened its eyes and looked up at her. And something inside Sarah's heart shifted. She thought about her life before this night. Working long shifts at the hospital, coming home to an empty apartment, eating dinner alone while watching television. Her life had become small and predictable after her divorce 2 years ago. She had stopped taking risks, stopped letting herself care too much about anything. It was safer that way, less painful. But now, these 2 tiny creatures depended on her completely. They had no one else. If she took them to a shelter, they might not survive. They were too young, too weak, and shelters were always overcrowded. Sarah knew the statistics. Many animals never made it out alive. The brown puppy stirred and made a small sound. Sarah stroked its soft fur, feeling the warmth of its body against her hand. For the first time in years, she felt needed. These puppies had crossed her path for a reason, and she couldn't turn away from that responsibility. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them. Her life would never be the same again, but maybe that was exactly what she needed. Morning arrived with harsh reality. Sarah called in sick to work, something she rarely did. Her supervisor sounded surprised, but understanding when Sarah explained she had caught a cold during the storm. It wasn't entirely a lie. She felt exhausted from staying awake all night. Her throat was scratchy from the freezing weather. The puppies needed to see a veterinarian immediately. Sarah searched online for clinics that offered low-cost services and found one across town that had good reviews. She carefully placed the puppies in a cardboard box lined with towels and took a taxi, not wanting to expose them to the cold weather again so soon. The waiting room at the clinic was crowded with people and their pets. A large dog barked loudly from one corner while a cat yowled from its carrier nearby. Sarah held the box protectively on her lap, worried that the noise and activity would stress the puppies. A woman sitting next to her peered into the box and smiled warmly. "Oh my goodness, they're precious," the woman said. "How old are they?" "I'm not sure," Sarah admitted. "I found them last night in the storm. They were abandoned." The woman's expression changed to one of sadness and anger. "People can be so cruel. You're a good person for rescuing them. Are you going to keep them?" Sarah hadn't allowed herself to fully answer that question yet. "I don't know. I'm just trying to make sure they survive first." After waiting nearly an hour, a veterinary technician called Sarah's name. She followed the young man into an examination room, where a friendly-looking veterinarian with gray hair and kind eyes greeted her. Dr. Martinez introduced himself and gently lifted each puppy from the box, examining them carefully. "These little ones have been through quite an ordeal," he said, his voice serious. "They're malnourished and dehydrated. I'd estimate they're about 5 weeks old, maybe 6. They should still be with their mother at this age." Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. Will they be okay? Dr. Martinez continued his examination, checking their ears, eyes, and teeth. He listened to their hearts with a stethoscope and palpated their tiny bellies. "They have a fighting chance thanks to you finding them when you did. Another few hours in that storm, and we'd be having a very different conversation. They need vaccinations, deworming medication, and special nutrition for the next several weeks." He explained everything in detail. The puppies would need to be fed special puppy formula every few hours for at least another week. They would need 3 rounds of vaccinations over the next few months. They needed flea treatment and would require regular checkups to monitor their growth and development. As Dr. Martinez talked, Sarah mentally calculated the costs and felt panic rising in her chest. "I understand this is a lot to take in," Dr. Martinez said, noticing her worried expression. "Let me be honest with you. Caring for 2 young puppies is challenging even in the best circumstances. Given their rough start, they'll need extra attention. Do you have experience with dogs?" Sarah shook her head. "No, I've never had a pet before. My parents were allergic, and then I got married young, and my ex-husband didn't want animals in the house." Dr. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. "There are rescue organizations that specialize in fostering young puppies. I can give you some contacts if you'd like to explore that option. No one would judge you for making that choice. You've already saved their lives." Sarah looked down at the puppies. The black one was sleeping peacefully while the brown one gazed up at her with trusting eyes. She thought about handing them over to strangers, never knowing what happened to them. The idea made her chest feel tight and painful. "How much will all of this cost?" she asked quietly. Dr. Martinez pulled out a calculator and wrote down some figures. "For today's visit, the examination, first vaccinations, deworming medication, and flea treatment. We're looking at around $200. That's with our rescue discount. Then you'll need formula, bottles, puppy food, for when they're old enough, and supplies. Over the next few months, you're probably looking at $1,500 to $2,000 total, assuming no complications." The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had about $800 in her savings account, money she had been carefully setting aside for emergencies. Her car needed new tires, and she had been planning to use that money for the repair. But these puppies were an emergency too. "Can I think about it?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," Dr. Martinez said gently. "But they do need at least their first round of vaccinations and medication today. That can't wait." Sarah made her decision. "Let's do it. Everything they need today." She paid the bill using her credit card, watching her available balance drop significantly. The veterinary technician gave her detailed instructions on how to care for the puppies, along with bags of supplies including bottles, formula, and medications. Sarah listened carefully, taking notes on her phone to make sure she remembered everything. On the taxi ride home, Sarah felt the weight of what she had just committed to. She had spent money she didn't really have on puppies she couldn't technically keep in her apartment. She had no idea how she would manage working full-time, while caring for 2 demanding infants who needed feeding every few hours. But when she looked down at their peaceful sleeping faces, she couldn't regret her decision. Back at her apartment, Sarah set up a proper space for the puppies in her bedroom. She used an old blanket to create a soft bed in a large plastic storage container. She placed a heating pad underneath the blanket, set on low, just as Dr. Martinez had instructed. The puppies seemed content in their new home, snuggling together and sleeping soundly. Sarah spent the afternoon puppy-proofing her apartment. She moved electrical cords out of reach, removed toxic plants, and secured anything that could be knocked over or chewed. She set alarms on her phone to remind her when to feed the puppies. She organized all their supplies in one area so she could find everything quickly during nighttime feedings. As evening approached, Sarah heard a knock on her door. Her heart sank. It was Mrs. Henderson, her neighbor. The elderly woman had lived in the building for 30 years and took it upon herself to know everyone's business. "Hello, dear," Mrs. Henderson said, her sharp eyes scanning past Sarah into the apartment. "I thought I heard some unusual sounds coming from your place today. Is everything all right?" Sarah's mind raced. "Everything's fine. I wasn't feeling well, so I stayed home from work. Must have had the television on." Mrs. Henderson nodded slowly, but her expression suggested she didn't quite believe the explanation. "I see. Well, if you need anything, you know where to find me." After closing the door, Sarah leaned against it and took a deep breath. She would have to be more careful. If the landlord found out about the puppies, she could be evicted. She couldn't let that happen, not now, that night. As Sarah fed the puppies their bedtime formula, she talked to them softly. "We're going to figure this out together," she promised. "I don't know how yet, but we will." The black puppy finished eating and looked up at her with dark, trusting eyes. The brown puppy yawned, showing tiny pink tongue and even tinier teeth. Sarah felt something fierce and protective bloom in her chest. These weren't just puppies anymore. Somehow, in less than 24 hours, they had become her puppies. Her responsibility? Her family. She thought about calling her sister Emma, who lived 2 states away. Emma had always been the practical one, the person Sarah turned to when she needed advice. But Sarah already knew what Emma would say. She would point out all the logical reasons why keeping the puppies was a bad idea. And Sarah didn't want to hear those reasons right now, even if they were true. Instead, she took a photo of the sleeping puppies and sent it to her best friend Rachel with a simple message: "I did something crazy." Within seconds, her phone rang. Rachel's excited voice filled the apartment as Sarah explained the whole story. Unlike Emma, Rachel was enthusiastic and supportive, already making plans to come visit and help with supplies. As Sarah finally climbed into bed that night, the puppies sleeping peacefully in their container nearby, she realized something important. For the first time since her divorce, she felt truly alive. Scared and uncertain, yes, but alive. The carefully controlled, risk-free life she had built was cracking open, and something new was growing in its place. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and constant worry. Sarah returned to work, but her schedule became a careful balancing act. She arranged her shifts to work 3 12-hour days instead of 5 8-hour days, giving her more time at home with the puppies. During her work days, she rushed home during her lunch break to feed them and check on their progress. The puppies grew stronger every day. Their eyes became brighter, their movements more energetic. Sarah named them Bear and Honey. Bear, the black puppy with white paws, had a serious personality and watched everything with careful attention. Honey, the brown puppy with the white chest patch, was playful and adventurous, always trying to explore beyond their designated area. Sarah's apartment transformed. Puppy training pads covered the bathroom floor. Toys scattered across the living room. Her once neat and organized space now showed evidence of the chaos that came with raising 2 young animals. But somehow, Sarah didn't mind. The apartment felt more like a home now, filled with life and purpose. The biggest challenge was keeping the puppies quiet. Dogs weren't allowed in the building, and Sarah lived in constant fear of discovery. She had started taking the puppies outside for bathroom breaks. Very early in the morning and late at night, when fewer neighbors were around, she carried them in a large tote bag, telling anyone who asked that she was taking work documents home. One afternoon, disaster nearly struck. Sarah had just returned from the grocery store when she heard Mrs. Henderson's voice in the hallway. The elderly woman was talking to their landlord, Peterson. Sarah froze with her hand on her apartment door, her heart pounding. Inside, she could hear Bear starting to whimper. "Yes, I'm quite sure I heard barking," Mrs. Henderson was saying. "Several times over the past week, coming from one of the units on this floor," Mr. Peterson's deep voice responded. "I'll look into it. The lease agreements are very clear about the no-pet policy. If someone's breaking the rules, they'll need to either remove the animal or move out." Sarah held her breath and slipped quietly into her apartment. Bear's whimpering grew louder, and Honey joined in. Sarah quickly picked them both up, holding them close and shushing them gently. Her mind raced. She couldn't lose this apartment. Rent-controlled units in the city were nearly impossible to find, and she couldn't afford market rate on her salary. That evening, Sarah's best friend Rachel arrived with supplies and support. Rachel had always been the bold one in their friendship, the person who encouraged Sarah to take chances and live fully. When Sarah opened the door, Rachel immediately squealed with delight at seeing the puppies. "Oh my God, Sarah, they're so cute," Rachel said, kneeling down to pet them. Bear cautiously approached her, while Honey jumped excitedly, trying to lick Rachel's face. "I can't believe how much they've grown already," Sarah explained her fears about the landlord and Mrs. Henderson. Rachel listened thoughtfully, then smiled mischievously. "I have an idea. My cousin owns a pet store across town. He mentioned he was looking for part-time help. The pay isn't great, but employees get a huge discount on supplies. Plus, he has connections with landlords who allow pets. Maybe you could pick up some weekend shifts and start looking for a new place." The suggestion made sense, but it also meant more change, more uncertainty. Sarah had lived in this apartment since her divorce. It was familiar and safe. The thought of moving again filled her with anxiety. "Think about it," Rachel said, seeing Sarah's hesitation. "You can't hide them forever. They're going to get bigger and louder. Better to plan ahead than wait for an eviction notice." After Rachel left, Sarah sat on the floor with the puppies climbing over her lap. She knew her friend was right. This situation couldn't continue indefinitely. She needed a real plan, not just hope that no one would discover her secret. The next day, Sarah contacted Rachel's cousin. His name was Marcus, and he sounded friendly and enthusiastic on the phone. He invited her to visit the pet store that weekend for an informal interview. Sarah arranged for Rachel to watch the puppies and took the bus across town. Marcus's store was small but well organized. It's filled with everything from fish tanks to bird cages. Marcus himself was a young man in his 30s, with several visible tattoos and a genuine smile. He showed Sarah around, explaining the different sections and introducing her to the other employees. "Rachel told me about your situation," Marcus said as they sat in his small office. "I think it's great what you're doing for those puppies. Not many people would take that kind of risk." Sarah felt herself relaxing. "I didn't really think about it. I just couldn't leave them there," Marcus nodded. "That's exactly the kind of person I want working here. Someone who actually cares about animals, not just someone looking for any job. The position is Saturday and Sunday, 6 hours each day. It's not much, but the employee discount is 50% off everything, and I'm pretty flexible with the schedule." They discussed details, and Marcus offered her the job on the spot. Sarah accepted, feeling both excited and terrified. She was already exhausted from her hospital shifts and caring for the puppies. Adding 12 more hours of work each week seemed impossible. But the discount would help tremendously with the growing costs of puppy supplies. Marcus also gave her information about several apartment buildings in the area that allowed pets. "The rent's a bit higher than what you're probably paying now," he warned. "But at least you wouldn't have to hide your dogs or worry about eviction." That night, Sarah looked up the apartments Marcus had mentioned. He was right about the rent. The cheapest option was $300 more per month than her current place. With her additional income from the pet store, she could technically afford it. But there would be no room for error, no money left over for savings or emergencies. Sarah spent hours making spreadsheets, calculating her budget from every angle. No matter how she arranged the numbers, moving to a pet-friendly apartment would stretch her finances to the breaking point. But staying where she was meant, living in constant fear, potentially losing everything if she was caught. The puppies were growing rapidly now. At 7 weeks old, they were becoming more active and vocal. Bear had developed a deep bark that echoed through the small apartment. Honey loved to howl, especially early in the morning. Sarah tried to keep them quiet. Puppies couldn't understand the need for silence. One morning, Sarah woke to urgent knocking on her door. She quickly put the puppies in the bathroom with some toys and opened the door to find Mr. Peterson standing in the hallway. Looking stern, "It's Miss Mitchell. I need to speak with you about a serious matter," he said. Sarah's stomach dropped. "Of course. What's this about?" "I've received multiple complaints about animal noises coming from this unit. I need to inspect the apartment right now." Sarah's mind went blank with panic. She couldn't refuse the inspection without admitting guilt. But if she let him in, he would obviously discover the puppies. She was trapped. "I understand," she said slowly, trying to buy time to think. "Could you give me just 10 minutes to tidy up?" "I wasn't expecting visitors." Mr. Peterson frowned. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm not concerned about tidiness. This is about a potential lease violation." From the bathroom, Bear let out a loud bark. Mr. Peterson's expression hardened. "I think we both know what I'm going to find in there." Sarah's shoulders sagged in defeat. There was no point in lying anymore. She opened the door wider and let him in. "I can explain," she began. Mr. Peterson walked directly to the bathroom and opened the door. Bear and Honey rushed out, tails wagging, excited to meet someone new. They jumped at Mr. Peterson's legs, thinking he was there to play. The landlord looked down at them, his expression unreadable. "How long have they been here?" he asked. 2 weeks, Sarah admitted. "I found them during that big storm. They were dying in an alley. I couldn't just leave them there. Mr. Peterson was silent for a long moment. You understand that keeping pets violates your lease agreement. I have grounds to evict you immediately. Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes but refused to let them fall. I understand. I'm already looking for a new place. I just need a little time. The landlord studied the puppies, who had now lost interest in him and were playing with each other, slaying and tumbling across the floor. He sighed heavily. I have a daughter about your age, he said finally. She volunteers at an animal shelter. She's always telling me stories about animals that need help. He paused, and Sarah held her breath. I'm giving you 60 days to find a new place. During that time, you need to keep them as quiet as possible. If I get more complaints, the deal is off. Understood? Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. Yes, thank you. I promise I'll be out within 60 days. After Mr. Peterson left, Sarah sat on the floor and let the tears come. They were tears of relief mixed with stress and exhaustion. The puppies climbed into her lap, sensing her distress, licking at her face and whining softly. She hugged them close, feeling the solid warmth of their small bodies. 60 days. She had 60 days to find an affordable apartment, save enough money for a deposit, and somehow balance everything without falling apart. It seemed impossible, but she had no choice. She had committed to these puppies, and she would see it through. Sarah's life became a whirlwind of activity. She worked her hospital shifts during the week, spent weekends at Marcus's pet store. In every spare moment was dedicated to apartment hunting and caring for Bear and Honey. Sleep became a luxury she could barely afford. Dark circles appeared under her eyes, and she lost weight from forgetting to eat regular meals. The puppies continued to thrive despite Sarah's exhaustion. At 9 weeks old, they had tripled in size from when she first found them. Their personalities became more distinct each day. Bear was cautious and protective, always watching Sarah carefully and staying close to her. Honey was fearless and curious, constantly getting into trouble by chewing furniture legs or pulling down curtains. Sarah's weekends at the pet store brought unexpected joy. She loved working with animals and helping customers choose the right supplies for their pets. Marcus became a good friend, offering advice about puppy training and recommending affordable veterinarians. The other employees welcomed her warmly. Soon Sarah found herself looking forward to her weekend shifts. But the apartment search was frustrating. Every place she looked at had problems. Some were too expensive, others were in dangerous neighborhoods, and a few that seemed promising fell through when the landlords learned she had 2 dogs instead of 1. Many places charged extra pet deposits and monthly pet rent that pushed the costs beyond her budget. With 3 weeks left on Mr. Peterson's deadline, Sarah still hadn't found anything suitable. Her stress levels reached new heights. She snapped at colleagues at work and found herself crying during her commute home. The puppies sensed her anxiety and became more clingy, following her everywhere and whining when she left the room. One Saturday afternoon at the pet store, Sarah was helping a customer select a dog bed when Marcus approached her. "Can you come to my office for a minute when you're done?" he asked. Sarah's heart sank. She assumed he was going to tell her she wasn't working out. She finished with the customer and walked slowly to Marcus's office. Preparing herself for more bad news, Marcus gestured for her to sit down. "Rachel told me you're having trouble finding an apartment. Is that true?" Sarah nodded, feeling embarrassed. She didn't like people knowing about her struggles. "I'm still looking. I'll figure something out." "I might have a solution," Marcus said. "My grandmother owns a duplex about 15 minutes from here. She's been renting out both sides, but one tenant just gave notice. It's a 2-bedroom place with a small yard. She's fine with pets because she loves animals. The rent is reasonable and she doesn't require a huge deposit." Sarah felt a flicker of hope but tried not to get too excited. Things that sounded too good to be true usually were. "How much is the rent?" Marcus named a figure that was only $200 more than her current apartment. With her combined income from both jobs, she could manage it. "The place needs some work," he added. "The previous tenant lived there for 8 years and wasn't great about maintenance. It needs painting, some minor repairs, that kind of thing. My grandmother would reduce the first 2 months' rent if you're willing to do the work yourself. Can I see it?" Sarah asked, her exhaustion suddenly forgotten. They drove to the duplex that evening after Sarah's shift ended. The building was older, but well-maintained, located on a quiet street lined with trees. Marcus's grandmother, a kind-faced woman in her 70s named Mrs. Chen, met them at the property. The apartment wasn't perfect. The kitchen was outdated, the bathroom had old fixtures, and the walls desperately needed fresh paint. But it had hardwood floors, large windows that let in natural light, and best of all, a fenced backyard perfect for the puppies. Sarah walked through each room, imagining how she could make it home. The previous tenant had cats, Mrs. Chen explained, pointing to scratches on the door frames. I need someone who will care for the place properly. Marcus tells me you work very hard and rescued 2 puppies. That tells me a lot about your character. Sarah felt tears threatening again, but this time they were tears of relief. I would love to rent this place. I promise I'll take good care of it. Mrs. Chen smiled warmly. Let's do the paperwork then. When can you move in? They agreed on a move-in date 2 weeks away, giving Sarah just enough time before Mr. Peterson's deadline expired. The deposit was manageable, especially with the reduced rent for the first 2 months. Sarah signed the lease with shaking hands, barely able to believe her luck. Driving home that night with the signed lease in her bag, Sarah felt lighter than she had in weeks. She called Rachel to share the good news, and her friends screamed with excitement so loudly that Sarah had to hold the phone away from her ear. We're having a moving party, Rachel declared. I'll get the gang together. You won't have to do this alone. True to her word, Rachel organized everything. She recruited friends, borrowed a truck, and even arranged for food and drinks on moving day. Sarah spent every evening that week packing her belongings and planning how to arrange furniture in the new place. The puppies seemed to sense something exciting was happening. They watched as Sarah boxed up their toys and blankets, their tails wagging constantly. Bear stayed close to Sarah, while Honey investigated every box and bag, trying to climb inside. Moving day arrived, sunny and warm. Rachel showed up at 7 in the morning with 5 other friends, all ready to help. Sarah had worried the move would be chaotic and stressful, but Rachel had organized everything like a military operation. Within hours, Sarah's furniture and boxes were loaded into the truck. Before leaving her old apartment for the last time, Sarah stood in the empty living room and remembered the night she brought the puppies home. She had been so scared and uncertain then. That frightened woman felt like a stranger now. Sarah had changed in ways she was still discovering at the duplex. Everyone worked together to unload boxes and arrange furniture. Marcus arrived with his grandmother, bringing lunch for everyone. Mrs. Chen immediately fell in love with the puppies, sitting on the floor and letting them climb all over her while she laughed delightedly. These 2 are special, Mrs. Chen said, scratching Bear behind his ears. They were meant to find you. By evening, the apartment was mostly set up. It wasn't perfect, but it was functional. After everyone left and Sarah was finally alone with the puppies, she took them into the backyard for the first time. Bear sniffed everything carefully, his tail wagging slowly. Honey ran in circles, barking with joy at having so much space to explore. Sarah sat on the back steps and watched them play. The yard wasn't large, but it had grass and a few trees. The evening air was cool and pleasant. She could hear neighbors talking and laughing through open windows, the sounds of normal life happening all around her. That night, Sarah slept better than she had in weeks. The puppies were exhausted from the excitement of moving and slept peacefully in their bed beside hers. No more worrying about every sound they made. No more hiding them from neighbors. They were home, truly home. The next few weeks flew by as Sarah settled into her new routine. She painted the apartment room by room, choosing cheerful colors that made the space feel bright and welcoming. She fixed the broken cabinet doors in the kitchen and planted flowers in the small garden bed by the front door. Mrs. Chen stopped by regularly, always bringing treats for the puppies and offering to watch them when Sarah worked long shifts. The puppies adjusted quickly to their new home. They learned to use the doggy door Sarah installed, giving them access to the backyard whenever they wanted. Bear became protective of the property, barking at strangers who walked by. Honey made friends with every neighbor, wagging her tail and trying to lick everyone she met. Sarah enrolled the puppies in a basic training class at a local community center. The classes were held on Tuesday evenings, and Sarah looked forward to them all week. The instructor was patient and knowledgeable, teaching Sarah how to communicate effectively with her dogs. Bear learned quickly, eager to please, and focused during lessons. Honey was more easily distracted, but eventually caught on to the basic commands at work. Sarah's colleagues noticed the positive changes in her. She smiled more often and seemed less stressed. Her supervisor commented on her improved attitude and offered her additional shifts if she wanted them. Sarah declined politely. She had learned an important lesson about balance. More money wasn't worth sacrificing time with the puppies or her own well-being. 3 months after finding Bear and Honey in the storm, Sarah sat in her backyard on a warm evening watching them play with a rope toy. They had grown so much, their legs longer and their features more defined. Dr. Martinez had estimated they would be medium-sized dogs, probably around 40 pounds each when fully grown. Sarah thought about her sister Emma, who she hadn't spoken to since briefly mentioning the puppies over the phone. Emma had reacted exactly as Sarah predicted, listing all the reasons why keeping them was impractical. The conversation had ended awkwardly, and they hadn't talked since. Sarah missed her sister, but wasn't ready to defend her choices anymore. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Marcus from the pet store. "Hey Sarah, I have a weird question. Do you remember that elderly couple who came in last week looking at the fancy dog beds?" Sarah remembered them clearly, Mr. and Mrs. Patterson. Sweet couple in their 80s who had just lost their beloved poodle. That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with the foster program information spread out in front of her. Bear lay at her feet while Honey chewed on a toy nearby. Sarah made lists of pros and cons, trying to approach the decision logically instead of emotionally. The cons were significant. Fostering would require time she barely had. It would mean more veterinary expenses, though the shelter covered most costs. It would mean emotional attachments to animals she would eventually have to give up. It would mean less attention for Bear and Honey, who were still young themselves and needed consistency. But the pros kept pulling at her heart. She had the space and experience now. She could save lives. She could help socialize puppies so they would be better prepared for adoption. She could make a real difference in the overwhelming problem of animal homelessness. Sarah called her sister Emma. They hadn't spoken in over a month, and Sarah knew she needed to rebuild that bridge. Emma answered on the third ring, her voice cautious. "Hi, Sarah. I was wondering when I'd hear from you." "I'm sorry I haven't called," Sarah said. "I know you think I made a mistake with the puppies." Emma sighed. "I don't think you made a mistake. I was just worried about you taking on too much. You have a tendency to give everything to others and forget about yourself." It was true, and Sarah knew it. She had always been the person who volunteered for extra shifts, who helped friends move, who said yes even when she was exhausted. The divorce had taught her that she couldn't save everyone, especially people who didn't want to be saved. But animals were different. They couldn't save themselves. Sarah told Emma about the shelter visit and the foster program. She expected her sister to discourage her, to list more reasons why it was too much. Instead, Emma was quiet for a long moment. "You sound different," Emma finally said. "Happier. More sure of yourself. If this is something you really want to do, and you've thought it through carefully, then I support you. Just promise me you won't burn yourself out." They talked for over an hour, really talked for the first time in years. Emma shared her own struggles with work and relationships. Sarah realized they had both been so focused on appearing strong that they had stopped being honest with each other. By the time they hung up, Sarah felt lighter and more connected to her sister than she had in years. The next morning, Sarah called the shelter and told Jessica she wanted to foster the litter of 6 puppies. Jessica sounded thrilled and relieved. They arranged for Sarah to pick up the puppies that weekend after she finished painting the spare bedroom, which would become the foster room. Rachel helped Sarah prepare the space. They covered the floor with washable mats, set up multiple feeding stations, and created comfortable sleeping areas. Sarah stocked up on supplies using her pet store discount. Marcus donated several items from the store and offered to help with any problems that came up. Mrs. Chen was delighted when Sarah told her about the fostering plan. "This house needs more love and life," she said. Those puppies are lucky to have you. On Saturday afternoon, Sarah drove to the shelter with a large crate in her car. Jessica met her with the 6 puppies, each one checked by a veterinarian that morning. They were slightly older now, about 6 weeks, but still small and fragile. They've been dewormed and had their first shots, Jessica explained. They'll need feeding every 4 hours, and you'll need to monitor them closely for any signs of illness. Here's my number if you have any concerns or questions. Sarah drove home carefully, hyper-aware of her precious cargo. The puppies whimpered in their crate, stressed by the unfamiliar experience. She talked to them soothingly, promising them they were safe now, at home. Sarah introduced the foster puppies to Bear and Honey carefully. She had researched proper introduction techniques and took it slowly. Bear was initially suspicious, sniffing the tiny puppies thoroughly and keeping himself between them and Sarah. But Honey was immediately fascinated, her tail wagging non-stop as she tried to play with them. Within an hour, all 8 dogs were comfortable together. Bear appointed himself as guardian, watching over the foster puppies and gently herding them away from anything dangerous. Honey became the fun playmate, engaging them in gentle wrestling matches and teaching them how to play with toys. The first night with 6 foster puppies was chaos. They cried constantly, missing their litter mates who had been separated and sent to other foster homes. Sarah barely slept, going to the foster room every hour to comfort them and make sure they were okay. By morning, she was exhausted but determined. The days developed a rhythm. Sarah fed the foster puppies before work, rushed home during lunch to feed them again, and spent her evenings caring for them. Bear and Honey adjusted to the temporary additions to their family. Bear took his guardian role seriously, alerting Sarah whenever one of the foster puppies wandered too far or got into trouble. Honey entertained them for hours, seemingly never running out of energy. Sarah documented the puppies' progress on social media, posting photos and videos. She created accounts for each foster puppy, giving them names and personalities. Cookie was the smallest and shyest. Peanut was the troublemaker who constantly escaped from the puppy pen. Muffin loved to cuddle. Biscuit was the loudest. Waffle slept the most. And Brownie was the adventurous leader who influenced the others. The posts gained followers quickly. People loved watching the puppies grow and play. Sarah shared honest stories about the challenges of fostering alongside the cute moments. She talked about sleepless nights, constant cleaning, and the emotional difficulty of temporary care. But she also shared the joy of watching scared puppies become confident and playful. Several of Sarah's co-workers at the hospital started following the accounts. One nurse, Patricia, approached Sarah during a break. "I've been watching your foster puppies online. My daughter has been begging for a dog, and I think we're finally ready. Would you tell me more about the adoption process?" Sarah's heart leaped. She explained everything about shelter adoption, gave Patricia the contact information for Jessica at the shelter, and offered to help them through the process. 2 weeks later, Patricia and her family adopted Cookie, the shy puppy who had bloomed into a sweet and affectionate dog. Watching Cookie leave with her new family was harder than Sarah expected. She had known this moment would come, had prepared herself for it, but tears still fell as she said goodbye. Cookie licked her face one last time before Patricia's daughter carried her to the car. Bear and Honey seemed confused when Cookie didn't return, searching the house for her that evening. "This is the hardest part," Rachel said when Sarah called her crying that night. "But you gave Cookie the chance at a good life. That family is going to love her so much." Sarah knew Rachel was right. Fostering meant temporary care, meant loving animals, and then letting them go. It meant choosing their well-being over her own attachment. It was painful, but it was also the whole point. These puppies deserved permanent homes with families who had chosen them specifically. Over the next few weeks, the other foster puppies were adopted one by one. Muffin went to a retired couple who had lost their dog the previous year. Biscuit and Waffle were adopted together by a family with 3 children. Peanut found a home with a young man who worked from home and wanted a constant companion. Brownie was adopted by a woman who ran a dog training business and saw potential in the smart, energetic puppy. Each goodbye hurt, but each one also filled Sarah with pride and satisfaction. She had taken 6 scared, malnourished puppies and transformed them into healthy, socialized dogs ready for their forever homes. She had made a real difference in their lives. The house felt empty and quiet after the last foster puppy left. Bear and Honey seemed to miss the chaos too, looking around as if searching for their temporary siblings. Sarah felt the emptiness like a physical ache, but she also felt accomplished and purposeful in a way she never had before. She called Jessica at the shelter. "I'm ready for another foster litter whenever you need me." Jessica laughed with relief. "You're a lifesaver, Sarah. Actually, we just got a call about a pregnant dog found abandoned. She's going to need a quiet foster home to have her puppies safely. Would you be interested?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. When can I pick her up?" Within days, Sarah was fostering Bella, a sweet but traumatized German Shepherd mix who was heavily pregnant. Bella was scared of everything, flinching at sudden movements and hiding in corners. Sarah worked patiently to build trust. Sitting quietly in the same room and letting Bella come to her on her own terms, Bear and Honey were gentle with Bella. Seeming to understand she needed special care, Bear would lie near her protectively, while Honey brought her toys as gifts. Slowly, Bella began to relax. She started eating regularly and following Sarah around the house. 1 week after arriving, Bella went into labor in the middle of the night. Sarah stayed with her through the entire process, which lasted 6 hours. Dr. Martinez had given Sarah his personal number for emergencies, and he talked her through everything over the phone. Bear sat outside the foster room door the entire time, refusing to leave his post. As dawn broke, Bella had delivered 7 healthy puppies. Sarah watched in awe as the exhausted mother dog cleaned each baby and nudged them toward her belly to nurse. It was miraculous and beautiful and terrifying all at once. Sarah was now responsible. Sarah's life revolved around the puppies and their mother. She reduced her hours at the hospital, explaining to her supervisor that she needed temporary flexibility for an important personal project. Fortunately, her supervisor was understanding, having followed Sarah's fostering journey on social media. The pet store work became her primary income, and Marcus adjusted her schedule to give her more predictable hours. Watching Bella transform from a scared, abandoned dog into a confident, devoted mother was incredible. The German Shepherd mix proved to be naturally nurturing, caring for her puppies with fierce dedication. She kept them clean, fed them on demand, became anxious if Sarah took any of them away for even a moment. As the puppies grew, their distinct personalities emerged. Sarah named them after different types of tea, keeping with a theme that amused her. There was Earl, a bold male with a gray patch over one eye. Chai was the smallest female who fought hardest for feeding position. Jasmine was sweet and gentle. Oolong was the troublemaker. Matcha had unusual green-tinted eyes. Ruibos was the quiet observer. And Salon was the biggest, most vocal of the litter. Sarah documented their development obsessively, taking hundreds of photos and videos. Her social media following had grown significantly, with thousands of people now invested in her fostering journey. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive, with many people sharing their own rescue stories or asking about how to become foster parents themselves. One follower, a woman named Diana, sent Sarah a private message. She explained that she was a journalist working on a story about animal rescue efforts in the city. She had been following Sarah's posts and wanted to interview her for the article. Sarah was hesitant at first, uncomfortable with attention, but Rachel convinced her it could help bring awareness to the shelter's foster program. The interview took place at Sarah's home on a sunny afternoon. Diana was professional and kind, asking thoughtful questions about Sarah's motivation for fostering and the challenges she faced. She photographed Bella with her puppies, Bear and Honey supervising nearby, and the resulting images captured the beautiful chaos of Sarah's life. The article was published 2 weeks later in the city's main newspaper and also appeared online. Sarah was shocked by the response. Her phone rang constantly with people asking about fostering, adoption, and how they could help. The shelter received dozens of new foster applications. Several local businesses reached out, offering to donate supplies. Marcus showed up at Sarah's door one evening with a broad smile and a bottle of wine. "You're famous," he teased. "My grandmother saw the article and called me crying happy tears." She says, "You're making the world better one puppy at a time." The attention was overwhelming, but also validating. Sarah had worried that people would judge her choices or think she was foolish for taking on so much. Instead, she found a community of like-minded people who understood the importance of rescue work. As Bella's puppies reached 8 weeks old and were ready for adoption, Sarah braced herself for the painful goodbyes. But this time felt different. She had watched these puppies come into the world. She had seen Bella nurture them from helpless newborns into playful, healthy dogs ready for their forever homes. The adoption event at the shelter was crowded with families who had followed the puppies' journey online. Sarah brought all 7 puppies, along with Bella, Bear, and Honey. The newspaper article had created significant interest, and the shelter staff was prepared for the turnout. Earl was adopted by a firefighter, who promised to train him as a therapy dog for burn victims. Chai went to a family with a daughter who had diabetes, with plans to train her as a medical alert dog. Jasmine found a home with an elderly veteran who needed companionship. Oolong was adopted by a couple who ran a dog daycare and wanted an energetic addition. Matcha went to a photographer who specialized in pet portraits. Ruibos was chosen by a librarian who wanted a calm, gentle companion. And Salon was adopted by a family with 4 children who wanted a big, friendly dog. Every adoption was bittersweet. Sarah cried as each puppy left with their new family, but she also felt immense pride. These 7 dogs would bring joy to their new homes. They had started life in the worst circumstances imaginable. Then came the hardest decision. The shelter asked Sarah if she wanted to adopt Bella permanently. The German Shepherd mix had bonded deeply with Sarah, and the shelter staff felt it would be traumatic to place her in another home. After everything she had been through, Sarah's first instinct was to say yes immediately. Bella deserved a permanent home, and Sarah loved her. But adopting a 3rd dog meant even more responsibility and expense. It meant less flexibility for fostering in the future. It meant a long-term commitment on top of Bear and Honey. She discussed it with Mrs. Chen, who had become a trusted confidant. They sat in Sarah's backyard watching Bear, Honey, and Bella play together. The 3 dogs had formed a tight pack, with Bella fitting naturally into the dynamic. "What does your heart tell you?" Mrs. Chen asked. Sarah watched Bella chase after a ball that Honey had dropped, her tail wagging with pure joy. This was the same dog who had cowered in corners just months ago, afraid of her own shadow. Now she was confident and happy, integrated into Sarah's family. "My heart says she's already home," Sarah admitted. "She's been through so much. I can't imagine putting her through another transition." Mrs. Chen smiled. "Then you have your answer. Sometimes the biggest risks bring the greatest rewards." Sarah officially adopted Bella the next day. The German Shepherd mix seemed to understand that she was home permanently, becoming even more relaxed and affectionate. She appointed herself as Bear's co-guardian, helping him watch over any new foster animals that came through the home. With 3 dogs, Sarah's life became even more complex, but also richer. She established a strict routine that allowed her to balance work, fostering, and caring for her own dogs. She woke at 5 every morning to walk all 3 dogs before work. She prepared their meals in batches on Sundays. She scheduled everything meticulously, leaving nothing to chance. The foster puppies continued to flow through her home. Some stays were brief, just a few weeks before adoption. Others lasted months for dogs with medical issues or behavioral problems that needed extra time and attention. Sarah learned to handle difficult cases, working with traumatized dogs who had been abused or neglected. One case particularly challenged her. A pit bull mix named Rocky had been seized from a fighting ring. He was aggressive with other dogs and fearful of men. The shelter asked Sarah to foster him because of her experience and the positive influence of Bear, Honey, and Bella. Rocky arrived muzzled and terrified, his body covered in scars from fighting. Sarah's heart broke looking at him. She immediately separated him from her other dogs and began the slow process of rehabilitation. She worked with a professional dog trainer, implementing strict safety protocols. For weeks, Rocky made little progress. He would cower in his crate, growling if anyone approached too quickly. He refused to eat unless Sarah left the room. He woke screaming from nightmares. Sarah questioned whether she was equipped to help him. whether she was doing more harm than good by keeping him isolated. Then one morning, Sarah was sitting on the floor reading, giving Rocky space while remaining present in the room. She felt something wet touch her hand and looked down to see Rocky's nose pressed against her palm. He had left his crate voluntarily for the first time. Sarah held completely still, barely breathing, as Rocky sniffed her hand thoroughly before retreating back to safety. It was a breakthrough. From that moment, Rocky began to trust slowly. He allowed Sarah to pet him briefly. He ate while she was in the room. He started responding to basic commands. The process was painfully slow, requiring more patience than Sarah knew she possessed. But gradually, Rocky transformed. After 3 months, Rocky was able to interact calmly with Bear under controlled circumstances. Bear's gentle, steady presence seemed to reassure Rocky that not all dogs were threats. Honey remained too energetic for Rocky's comfort, but Bella became his unlikely friend, perhaps because she understood trauma herself. Bella was patient with Rocky's fears and limitations. The day Rocky played with a toy for the first time, Sarah cried with relief and happiness. This dog, who had known only violence and pain, was learning to be a dog again. He would never be fully normal. His past had damaged him too deeply. But he could have a quality of life he had never known before. Finding an adopter for Rocky was challenging. Most people wanted easy dogs, puppies, or young adults, without baggage. Rocky needed someone special, someone with experience and patience, and a home without other pets or young children. Sarah worried he would be with her forever, not because she didn't love him, but because he deserved a person who could give him their full attention. Then, a woman named Catherine contacted the shelter, specifically asking about Rocky. She was a retired military dog handler who had seen Rocky's story on Sarah's social media. She understood traumatized animals and had experience with aggressive dogs. She wanted to give Rocky the specialized home he needed. Sarah was cautious during Catherine's first visit. Rocky's progress was fragile, and she didn't want to jeopardize it with the wrong placement. But watching Catherine interact with Rocky, Sarah knew immediately this was right. A year after finding Bear and Honey in the storm, Sarah's life was unrecognizable from what it had been before that fateful night. She had fostered over 40 dogs, helping them recover and find permanent homes. Her social media following had grown to over 50,000 people who followed her fostering journey with genuine interest and support. The shelter had recognized Sarah's dedication by naming her Foster Parent of the Year at their annual fundraising gala. Sarah attended the event wearing a simple dress, feeling out of place among the wealthy donors in their expensive clothing. But when they called her name and she walked to the stage to accept the award, the applause was thunderous. People stood, honoring not just Sarah, but all foster parents who opened their hearts and homes to animals in need. Sarah's speech was brief and from the heart. She talked about Bear and Honey, about that stormy night that changed everything. She explained that fostering wasn't about being special or heroic. It was simply about seeing a need and choosing to help, even when it was inconvenient or scary. She encouraged everyone in the room to consider fostering, emphasizing that shelters desperately needed temporary homes for animals. After the gala, several attendees approached Sarah with questions about fostering. A businessman offered to sponsor her fostering efforts, covering veterinary expenses for difficult cases. A lawyer offered free legal advice for any animal welfare issues. A marketing executive offered to help expand Sarah's social media presence to reach more potential adopters and foster parents. Sarah accepted help cautiously, not wanting to lose the personal connection she had with her followers. She agreed to let the marketing executive create a website that would serve as a resource for potential foster parents, with guides on getting started, managing challenges, and finding reputable rescue organizations. The site also featured adoptable dogs from local shelters, with Sarah promoting them through her social media channels. The impact was immediate. Adoption rates at the shelter increased by 30% in the following months. Other shelters across the city reached out, asking Sarah to promote their animals as well. What had started as one woman rescuing 2 freezing puppies had evolved into a movement that was saving hundreds of lives. But success brought new challenges. Sarah received constant messages from people asking for help with their own rescue situations. She tried to respond to everyone, offering advice and encouragement, but it became overwhelming. She was stretched, impossibly thin, working, fostering, managing social media, and trying to maintain some semblance of personal life. Rachel noticed Sarah's exhaustion and staged an intervention of sorts. She arrived at Sarah's house one evening with takeout food and a serious expression. "You're burning out," Rachel said bluntly. "I can see it. You're helping everyone else, but neglecting yourself." Sarah wanted to argue, but she couldn't. She was exhausted constantly, running on coffee and determination. She had stopped exercising, ate irregular meals, and couldn't remember the last time she had done something purely for enjoyment. Even her time with Bear, Honey, and Bella felt rushed, squeezed between other obligations. "I can't stop now," Sarah protested. "There are so many animals that need help. If I take a break, what happens to them?" Rachel grabbed Sarah's hands. "If you collapse from exhaustion, you can't help anyone. You need to set boundaries and take care of yourself. Remember what they say on airplanes? Put on your own oxygen mask before helping others." The conversation forced Sarah to confront uncomfortable truths. She had thrown herself into fostering partly because it was meaningful work, but also because it allowed her to avoid dealing with other aspects of her life. She hadn't dated since her divorce. She had let friendships fade except for Rachel. She defined herself entirely by her rescue work, which was both purposeful and problematic. Sarah made changes slowly. She set specific hours for social media, refusing to check messages outside those times. She hired a volunteer to help manage the website and respond to basic questions. She limited herself to fostering 2 animals at a time instead of taking every case that came her way. She joined a gym and committed to going 3 times a week, treating exercise as non-negotiable. Most importantly, she started therapy. Sarah had resisted counseling after her divorce, convincing herself she was fine. But she wasn't fine. She was carrying years of pain and disappointment that she had never properly processed. The therapist helped Sarah understand that her intense focus on rescue work was partly about control. She couldn't control what had happened in her marriage, couldn't save that relationship, but she could save animals. She could control their outcomes and feel successful in ways she hadn't in other areas of her life. Understanding this didn't make Sarah love rescue work less, but it did help her approach it more healthily. She learned to celebrate successes without immediately moving to the next crisis. She practiced saying no to requests that would overwhelm her capacity. She allowed herself rest without guilt. 6 months into this new balance, Sarah met someone. His name was James, and he was a veterinarian at a clinic across town. They met at a rescue fundraiser where James was volunteering his services. He had seen Sarah's social media posts and recognized her immediately. "You're the woman who fostered Rocky," he said, approaching her with a warm smile. "That was incredible work. Most people wouldn't have taken on a case that challenging." They talked for hours that night, discovering shared passions for animal welfare and similar experiences with difficult life transitions. James had gone through his own divorce 3 years earlier and had also found healing through working with rescue animals. He understood Sarah's dedication without needing explanation. Their relationship developed slowly and naturally. James was patient with Sarah's busy schedule and supportive of her fostering work. He helped with difficult cases, offering medical advice and sometimes providing after-hours care for foster animals. Bear, Honey, and Bella loved him immediately, which Sarah took as an excellent sign. Sarah's sister Emma visited for the first time since. Sarah had adopted Bear and Honey. Emma was amazed by the transformation in both Sarah and her home. The duplex was organized despite housing 3 permanent dogs and 2 current foster puppies. Sarah seemed confident and purposeful in ways Emma had never seen before. "I was wrong," Emma admitted as they sat in the backyard watching the dogs play. "I thought you were taking on too much, making another impulsive decision that would end badly. But this has been good for you. You found your calling." Sarah smiled. "I think my calling found me. I wasn't looking for any of this. It just happened, starting with 2 freezing puppies on a stormy night. As autumn arrived, bringing cooler weather, and the anniversary of that fateful night, Sarah reflected on the journey. She thought about the woman she had been a year ago, walking home from work, lonely and disconnected from life. That woman had been going through the motions, existing but not truly living. Then Bear and Honey had crossed her path, two tiny creatures in desperate need, and everything changed. Sarah had taken a risk, making a choice that seemed foolish and impractical. She had faced challenges that pushed her beyond what she thought she could handle. She had discovered strength and purpose she didn't know she possessed. The fostering work continued. Sarah had two young pit bull puppies currently in her care, both surrendered by an owner who couldn't manage their energy. She was working with them on basic training and socialization, preparing them for adoption to active families who would appreciate their enthusiasm. Her own dogs were thriving. Bear, now a handsome 50-pound dog with dignified bearing, had become an exceptional foster sibling, teaching manners to rowdy puppies with patient persistence. Honey was still energetic and friendly, greeting every new foster animal with excitement and helping them feel comfortable. Bella had overcome her traumatic past completely, transforming into a confident, loving dog who served as a calming presence for anxious fosters. Sarah's work at the hospital had improved as well. Better rested and more balanced, she was more present with patients and colleagues. Several coworkers had been inspired by her example and had adopted rescue dogs themselves. One had even started fostering, texting Sarah constantly with questions and updates. On the anniversary night, Sarah took Bear and Honey back to the alley where she had found them. It seemed important somehow, acknowledging where their story began. The alley looked different now, less threatening in the dim light. Sarah stood there remembering that night, the wind and snow, the scared whimpering sounds that had made her stop and investigate. "You saved me as much as I saved you," she said softly to the dogs sitting attentively at her feet. "You taught me that love requires action, that purpose often finds us when we least expect it, and that being open to change can lead to the most beautiful transformations." Bear leaned against her leg, while Honey wagged her tail, both seeming to understand the significance of this moment. Sarah took photos of them in the alley, documenting how far they had come. She posted the images that night with a long caption about second chances, gratitude, and the unexpected ways life redirects us toward our true path. The post received thousands of comments. People shared their own rescue stories, thanked Sarah for inspiring them to foster or adopt, and expressed how following her journey